Hello everybody, I'm Hujiwana and today's Spacedock video is a big fat opinion piece where I rank the Canon Star Destroyers from absolutely terrible to pretty cool. I won't be including some things like the Detector or some of the book or comic only ones that weren't developed that much, basically because I just have no opinion on them. Also, there may be things here that aren't technically Star Destroyers, but I'm going to rank them anyway
because this is my list and you can't stop me.
But you can subscribe to the channel for future ranking lists and other fun spaceship content we're working on. We start with the absolute worst of all of them, and you already know what it is, the XYSTON-CLASS. A product of utter ridiculousness and the crowning jewel in the issues with the sequel trilogy, which, like the movie it's in, could have been avoided with better planning and forethought and less wild panic and knee-jerk responses to the reception of The Last Jedi. It must have sucked being the artists responsible for this thing, forced to do a naive upscaling of an asset from Rogue One and gluing a big dumb gun to the bottom of it. I feel for the almost certainly overworked VFX artists who worked on the shots these show up in, knowing they're going to get a lot of the blame for something entirely out of their control. The XYSTON is not on them, it's on the higher up production team for throwing out what plans they did have to shove in old Sheevy Boy and a ridiculous galactic threat with numbers of vessels so large it becomes incomprehensible. Second to last place isn't technically a Star Destroyer, but I already talked about that. It is the MANDATOR 4-class Siege Dreadnought. And what a weird class name that is. The reason it's the worst real design is just how ugly I think it is. A giant flat pizza slice with that weird oversized horizontal bridge section that looks like it'll snap off in a breeze, if there was a breeze in space. The traditional Star Destroyer greebly detailed trenches along the edges of the pizza slice are just too thick and make the whole design look a bit messy. And those two guns on the underside, oh lord, what is going on with those? I get that it's meant to be a ship for dealing with planetary shields and whatnot, but this is just taking the every ship in space is aligned the same way thing to ridiculous levels. It shoots planets so the guns must be on the bottom facing downwards. It's just ridiculous. It's also supposed to be a predecessor to the XYSTON, which did the same bloody thing, so why not just use these ugly buggers instead of a big Imperial one? Mind-boggling. This next one may be 11th place, but there's a gap between just how much I dislike the MANDATOR and XYSTON and this, the SECUTOR. My opinions towards this carrier are more on the side of indifference to dislike, as well, it's kind of okay. It gets the lowest rating in the mid-tiers due to the sort of ugly design that's out of proportion to itself, with it being too wide to really pull off that midsection bridge. The whole ship looks a bit like a Venator that's been left out in the sun and melted. It does get points for having the split bridges of the Venator, I wonder where that's going to be on the list, and for being a proper carrier in a setting where starfighters are king, but it's not enough to save it. In 10th place is the Gladiator-CLASS, which I don't really have all that much to say about. On the plus side, it's one of the smaller ships here, and it was intended to act as an escort to its larger siblings, adding in some much needed variety in ship roles. The cutout in the front is unique out of every ship on this list, but depending on the depiction, the whole ship looks a bit too rectangular. In a very close 9th place, the ACCLAMATOR, which again isn't really a Star Destroyer. It's here because it doesn't really do much of anything interesting. Sure, it's a transport and landing craft as opposed to a warship, but it's kind of dull. The painted version is better though. Now we have the last of the 3 superweapon ships taking the number 8 slot, the ONAGER. This one does the supergun concept the best by sticking the weapon in a huge spinal mount rather than a weird down-facing turret. As a rarely seen siege vehicle, it reminds me of the super heavy assault tanks from World War II that never saw deployment. I feel like this layout also does a better job of portraying the power of the weapons it carries, as if it's focusing the output from its reactors directly at its target. The massive hammerhead shape is also unique, but just a bit oversized for my liking. I will say that using the space for hangars is a nice touch, and would probably be the fastest way of actually travelling between the two sides of the ship, as the superweapon trench is in the way. And now we reach the midpoint of the list at 7th place, with what I consider to be the most average Star Destroyer, both versions of the Imperial-Class. I am curious as to where the class got its name from though. Please don't tell me it's because Han refers to one as an Imperial cruiser when escaping Tatooine, as he clearly meant that it's just a cruiser from the Empire. Star Wars historians in the audience, let me know. But that's neither here nor there. The reason it's slap bang in the middle of this list is, well, it doesn't do anything particularly special or interesting, but it is at least really great looking. This one ship set the style for the entire Empire, with its massive blocks of superstructure made from stark unpainted metal, and its vast imposing shape that just oozes strength. Out of the two, I prefer the second one with the flat comms tower on the bridge rather than the cross-shaped tractor beam thingy. We are now reaching the potentially controversial spots as we hit 6th place with the Executor. I love this thing's appearance, the natural evolution of the already great Imperial-Class into something far more menacing, perfectly suited to be Vader's ship in Empire Strikes Back. That gorgeous arrowhead shape with the cutout city blocks on the top to sell the sheer size of the thing, and the notch on the ventral surface towards the front, and the whole underslung engine blocks are all just brilliant. The Super Star Destroyer is probably one of the best looking ships in the whole franchise, but it is just too big. It has no reason to be this huge, unlike another Star Dreadnought that I'll talk about in a minute or two. As a one-off ship that was specifically made for Vader, it might have been acceptable, but loads of these things were churned out. The Empire already had one massive capital ship class in the form of the Imperial. Building the much larger Executor en masse is just ludicrous. The complete opposite in scale to the Executor is the Victory-Class, which, despite me not having all that much to say about it, handily takes the number 5 spot. This is thanks to its more sensible scale and solid foundation due to its similarity to its bigger brother, the Imperial-Class, keeping roughly the same imposing shape and style, but just different enough that it's still recognisably a different class. The sensor towers on the bridge section are great. I love visible sensors and antennas, though I think I prefer the sensor suite on the Victory 1 over the Victory 2. It's also a rarely seen missile boat, a very welcome bit of variety in the land of green and red lasers. In joint 4th place is the Interdictor-Class and the Interdictor-Class. These are both specialised ships that fulfill the role of controlling access to hyperspace, a vitally important function given the hit-and-run tactics best used to fight the Imperial Navy. This is why both these ships are up here in the top 5, as it's such a key thing to be able to project control over, and helps add variety and strategic utility to a fleet. They both look fantastic as well, with the very obvious gravity well generators going right through the hull. Between the two, I think I prefer the newer version seen in Rebels for its flatter appearance and smaller size, but the older one that's based on the Imperial-Class isn't too shabby either. We return to the First Order for 3rd place with the Resurgent-Class, which is just glorious. It takes everything great about the looks of the Imperial-Class and refines it, from the dorsal superstructure steps to the much squatter bridge section. It even has some visible sensor equipment atop the bridge, laid out with a nice bit of asymmetry with the bridge deflector shield. The massive cutout that starts at its prow with those thick structural beams in it gives it the look of a predator, something with a terrible bite. Where the Imperial-Class projected power and strength, the Resurgent is mean and projects anger, the perfect complement to the instability of Kylo Ren. The downside is that it's become somehow even more oversized than its Imperial predecessors, almost like there's some sort of adolescent measuring contest going on. Now, before I reveal the 2nd place Star Destroyer, and by extension my favourite one, I have to do some honourable mentions to a trio of terrific triangular ships that aren't quite oversized enough to be true Star Destroyers. The first of these is the Quasar-Fire class, which has a weird name but fits a niche in the reasonably scaled ships category as a light carrier. The next one is the Raider class, as this is such a brilliant take on the Star Destroyer shape applied to a great little hero ship style design, while throwing in TIE Fighter style panels and having neat little pop-up missile launchers. The third mention goes to the various ships of the Architens line, which is such a great transitionary step between the old style of Republic ship and the new Star Destroyer aesthetic. That small cutout in the front is also just the right size to accentuate its looks while not being oversized like the one on the Gladiator-Class. And here we are, the top 2. 2nd place may surprise you given the placement of the Executor, but I have good reasons. It is the First Order's Mega class. It is the First Order's Mega class, which naturally also reveals the top pick, but you gotta wait your turn, get out of here! We're going to start off with that terrible class name though, which really just smacks of continued childish one-upmanship on the behalf of those who made the thing, along with its truly gargantuan scale. While the Executor may be longer, the Mega class, no, I'm going to call it the Supremacy because, well, there was only one of them. The Supremacy was over 60 kilometers wide. Unlike the Executor, there's actually some justification for it being this obscenely huge, as it was the mobile headquarters for the First Order. It had a full industrial supply chain, from asteroid mining complexes to construction facilities for resurgents and ground vehicles. Along the aft edge of its huge flying wing shape were slots to dock resurgents into, pretty much like any space station would have. And this has turned into a breakdown. Let's go back to what I was saying, which is that I think the Supremacy looks amazing. It takes the style of the Resurgent and Executor and seamlessly blends them together while transforming the shape into something relatively new for the franchise. In fact, the shape seems to have even directly inspired the Juggernaut ships in the Federation's DLC for Stellaris, which are essentially horizontally oriented mobile star bases like the Supremacy is. While its flying wing shape is great, one thing I wish it had included was making the command section with the overbridge and Snoke's throne room capable of detaching, like a giant Resurgent scale escape pod. That would have been neat. At long last, what I think is the best Star Destroyer, and you know what it is already, the Venator-CLASS. Where do I even start with this? The shape. The arrowhead is just fantastic, and gives it an instantly recognisable silhouette. The notches on the side that conceal the port and starboard hangar bays is a brilliant little use of negative space, and the dorsal superstructure rising up to the twin bridges evokes similar feelings to the ships that come after it, while being distinct enough that it's still completely impossible to mistake it for something else. And those two bridges have purpose. One is for the command of the ship, the other is to coordinate the huge wing of fighters it carries, because the Venator is pretty much a carrier. It's still a bit of a do-everything ship, but that pretty much applies to every Star Wars capital ship, because collectively they are all just too big and too covered in guns and other stuff to not be do-everythingable. The carrier bias the Venator has though is a huge plus for it, as clearly starfighters are the real heart of space combat in Star Wars, though that may be more for character reasons, as it's the main stars of the story flying them. Except for that guy who crashed into the Executor with his A-Wing and managed to decapitate the largest ship present that wasn't the Death Star. Oh well. The huge central trench leading to the internal hangars is a bit of a structural weakness, but that's what the massive deployable doors and shields are there for, and painting those red is just great. As with the Acclamator, those splashes of colour elevate the whole look of the ship, and the Empire using unpainted ones was a travesty. Even then, they still look better than the Imperial-Class. In fact, I think they look better than every other ship in the franchise. My only gripe is that the engine layout doesn't line up with the ship's centre of mass, but whatever, it's Star Wars, it doesn't matter at all. So that's it, my ranking of the Star Destroyers, which you can completely agree with or utterly eviscerate in the comments, or by liking or indeed disliking the video. If you want to support the channel more directly, you can become a channel member by clicking the join button, or through the Patreon Officers Club like these lovely people on screen. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.